Barron Trump was no stranger to privilege. As the youngest son of the sitting president of the United States, he had grown up in a world of luxury surrounded by staff, private jets, and lavish dinners. But deep down, he was different from his public persona. While his siblings had made their mark in the business and political worlds, Barron had always been the quiet one, preferring the background to the spotlight. One afternoon, Barron found himself in a unique situation that would change his perspective forever. It all started when he was accompanying his father, President Donald Trump, on a tour of a military base in the heart of Texas. The president had been invited to inspect new military equipment, and Barron, ever curious, was invited along for the ride. It was meant to be just another day of meeting generals and touring high-tech military installations, but Barron had no idea what was in store. As they toured the base, one of the military officers, a seasoned veteran named Colonel Harris, approached the president with an offer that seemed more like a challenge than an invitation. "Mr. President, we've got a tradition here. We invite distinguished guests to try one of our military MREs, meals ready to eat. It's a test of endurance and taste. Maybe your son would like to take part." Colonel Harris said with a grin, referring to the Army's famous packaged meals. Barron's eyes lit up. He had heard of the infamous MREs, but he'd never tasted one. Despite the rumors about their questionable taste, there was something about the challenge that piqued his interest. President Trump chuckled. "Barron, what do you think? You always say you're up for a challenge." Barron hesitated, looking around at the military personnel gathered. His father, the leader of the free world, had spent years facing intense scrutiny, managing international crises, and enduring endless media attention. Barron, by contrast, had only been in the public eye on a few occasions, and those moments had usually involved being photographed alongside his father at political events or high society gatherings. This was different. This was real. This was raw. "I'm in," Barron said, surprising even himself with his eagerness. The colonel gave him a nod of approval. "All right, Barron, we'll get you set up with an MRE and then we'll see how you handle it." The group made their way to a small area near the base's mess hall where several other soldiers were stationed. Barron sat down at a table with his father and the colonel, who handed him a sealed, vacuum-packed bag with the military's signature MRE logo on it. Barron looked at the bag and then back at the colonel, raising an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" Barron asked, a mix of curiosity and uncertainty in his voice. Colonel Harris smiled. "You'll see soon enough. It's not gourmet, but it gets the job done. You'll need some water too. Trust me." Barron opened the MRE with the careful precision of someone who had never been in this situation before. Inside, he found a mix of cold food items, packets of crackers, a small spoon, and something that resembled a candy bar. It wasn't exactly what he had expected, but there was something strangely intriguing about the simplicity of it all. "Okay, Barron, here we go," Colonel Harris said. "Open the other pouch. That's the heater. You'll need that to warm up your entree." Barron carefully followed the colonel's instructions, and within minutes, the small bag began to heat up, releasing a faint smell of what could only be described as a mix between beef stew and mystery meat. His stomach churned, but he wasn't about to back down now. After all, this was a challenge. One that he had accepted without fully understanding what he was getting into. As Barron opened the pouch containing the main entree, he could feel the heat radiating from it. The smell wasn't exactly appetizing, but Barron pushed past his initial reaction. "Okay, here goes nothing," he muttered under his breath, poking his fork into the mix. Barron lifted the fork to his mouth, feeling the weight of the moment. The military MRE wasn't just a meal. It was a symbol of endurance, resilience, and the grit of the men and women who fought for their country. He had heard the stories, of course, the long hours spent on the front lines, the harsh conditions, the need for food that could withstand the elements while still providing enough energy to keep soldiers going. But it wasn't until he was holding that plastic fork and staring at the lukewarm, mystery-colored food on his tray that he truly understood what it meant to survive on the basics. With a deep breath, Barron took his first bite. The texture was different. Not exactly unpleasant, but definitely not like anything he'd ever had before. The flavors were flat, and the beef stew, if that's what it was, had the consistency of rubber. The aftertaste was somewhat metallic, but there was something oddly satisfying about it. It was like he was tasting history. Millions of soldiers before him had eaten this same meal, and somehow that thought gave him a sense of connection to them. He took another bite, chewing slowly. The soldiers around him watched with amused expressions, clearly interested to see how Barron would react. "So, Barron," Colonel Harris asked with a grin, "how's it taste?" Barron paused, trying to suppress the urge to grimace. He didn't want to embarrass himself, especially in front of his father and the military personnel. He set his fork down, looked up at the colonel and said, "It's definitely not what I expected, but I get it. It's not about the taste. It's about getting the job done." The colonel's smile widened. "Exactly. You've got it, son. You may not enjoy every meal you get in the military, but it will keep you going when you need it most." Barron nodded, impressed by the simplicity of the lesson. The food wasn't fancy, it wasn't gourmet, but it was effective. For the first time in a long while, Barron felt a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to his family's name, wealth, or fame. It was about doing something for himself, something that would challenge him in a way that wasn't wrapped in luxury. "All right, Barron," President Trump said, breaking his silence. "You handled that better than I would've. You've got my respect, son." Barron smiled faintly, feeling a rush of pride. It wasn't often that he received praise from his father, and this moment, though small, meant more to him than any praise for a high-profile public appearance. "You're doing good," the colonel added. "The soldiers here go through some tough stuff, and those meals, those MREs, are a part of what gets us through the day. It's not about the food. It's about the mission. It's about resilience." Barron sat back in his chair, processing the words. He had always known about resilience. He had seen it in his father, in the way President Trump handled every criticism, every attack, every challenge. But seeing it in action, seeing the men and women of the military face adversity with nothing but their will to succeed and a meal that was more about necessity than pleasure, gave Barron a new perspective on life. For a brief moment, the world of politics, fame, and fortune seemed distant. Here, surrounded by soldiers who didn't care about his last name, Barron was just another person trying to prove himself. "How do you feel, Barron?" his father asked, his voice softening slightly. Barron didn't have to think long. "It's hard to explain," he began, staring at the remnants of the MRE. "But I feel like I understand something I didn't before. It's not about the privilege. It's about pushing yourself, doing things you never thought you could." There was a long pause before President Trump spoke again. "I'm proud of you, son. You've got more grit than most people realize. That's something no one can take from you." Barron didn't respond right away. He was still processing everything, the taste of the MRE, the camaraderie of the soldiers, the sense of accomplishment that came from stepping out of his comfort zone. He had always been in the background, never one to seek attention. But in that moment, he realized that the world would respect him for his actions, not just his name. Just as Barron was about to take another bite, a young soldier walked over, holding up a small envelope. "Excuse me, sir," the soldier said, addressing Colonel Harris. "We've got a message from headquarters. They want the president to see this immediately." Colonel Harris glanced at Barron before turning to the president. "Mr. President, we've got a situation. Should we take a break from the meal?" President Trump's eyes narrowed, his face becoming more serious. "No need for that. Let's handle this now. Barron, you're okay to finish up here while I take a look at this." Barron nodded, watching as his father stood up and followed the soldier away from the table. As the president disappeared around the corner, Barron returned to his meal, taking another small bite. The world of politics and power could wait, he thought. For now, he was just a young man who had taken on a challenge and found inspiration in the most unexpected of places. As Barron continued to eat, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet pride. He had taken on a challenge that many would have hesitated to even consider. Despite the food's lackluster taste and strange texture, he felt as though he had done something important, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced adversity without fanfare. The soldiers around him continued to go about their business, some enjoying their MREs with casual indifference, while others, clearly more accustomed to the simplicity of military life, hardly seemed to notice the young Trump in their midst. Barron realized that in this world, his last name meant nothing. Here, no one was impressed by his lineage or his father's influence. Here, he had to earn respect the same way everyone else did. He glanced over at the table where his father had been sitting. The president was deep in conversation with the officer who had delivered the urgent message. Barron didn't know what the message was about, but he could tell from his father's demeanor that it was serious. The president's face had hardened, his usual joviality replaced by the steely focus that Barron had witnessed during critical moments in his life. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Barron felt no fear. Instead, there was a strange sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't feeling the pressure of being a Trump. He wasn't the young heir to a business empire or the son of a president with a million eyes on him. He was simply a young man sitting in a mess hall with military personnel having a meal and reflecting on his life. As he finished his MRE, Barron looked around at the soldiers. They were ordinary people just like him, but they had made extraordinary sacrifices. They were living a life of discipline and endurance that he couldn't quite fathom. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't easy, but they did it because it was their duty. He wondered briefly what his own duty was. He had been born into a world of immense privilege, but what had he done to deserve it? He had never experienced the hardships that these soldiers faced daily. He had never had to rely on something as basic as an MRE for survival. In a flash, Barron remembered something his mother, Melania Trump, had said to him when he was younger. "You may have everything in the world, Barron, but it's your actions that will define you. Never forget that." The words echoed in his mind as he finished the last of his meal. He had never really understood the full meaning of those words until now. They weren't just about how he treated others or how he carried himself in public. They were about the choices he made, the challenges he accepted, and the ways he would one day contribute to the world. As Barron stood up to dispose of his empty MRE tray, Colonel Harris came over to him, his face softer than before. "You know, Barron," the colonel began, "most people who are in your position wouldn't have even thought about trying an MRE. But you did. That's more than a lot of people can say. You've got guts, kid." Barron smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him. "Thanks, Colonel. It wasn't much, but it meant something to me." The colonel nodded. "It means something to all of us. And I think you've learned a little about what it takes to push yourself beyond the comforts of home. You might not have to eat these every day, but you've got a new understanding of what it's like for the people who do." Just then, President Trump returned to the table. His expression had softened, but there was a distinct sense of urgency in his movements. "Barron," he said, his voice steady but with an edge of concern, "I need to speak with you for a minute." Barron followed his father a few paces away from the table, out of earshot of the others. He could see that something was weighing heavily on his father's mind, and though Barron had been raised to keep his emotions in check, he knew something was happening that could change things for everyone. "Everything okay, Dad?" Barron asked. The president took a deep breath, his usually confident demeanor showing a rare vulnerability. "There's a situation in Washington. Something major is happening right now, and I need to handle it." He paused, meeting Barron's eyes. "But I want you to know that what you did today, trying that MRE, taking part in something that wasn't comfortable for you, that shows a lot of character." Barron didn't quite know what to say. He wasn't used to receiving such words of affirmation from his father, especially in moments of serious crisis. "I'm proud of you, Barron," the president continued. "You're learning what it means to take responsibility, not just as the son of a president, but as a man who will one day have to make his own choices." Barron nodded, feeling a weight settle on his shoulders. It wasn't a burden, though. It was a responsibility, one that had just become much clearer to him. As much as he had tried to avoid the spotlight in the past, he now realized that his actions could make a difference. Whether it was through stepping up in moments of crisis or through something as simple as eating an MRE, he had the ability to inspire others. "Thanks, Dad," Barron said quietly. "I think I get it now. It's not about the luxuries. It's about what you do when it really counts." President Trump placed a hand on Barron's shoulder. "That's right, son. Keep that in mind, no matter where life takes you." As Barron and his father stood there, the weight of the moment seemed to settle in. The noise of the mess hall, the clatter of trays and conversations faded into the background. Barron felt as though he was standing on the edge of something much larger than himself, something that could change the way he looked at life from now on. He had never expected an MRE of all things to lead him to such a profound realization. The president, noticing the shift in Barron's demeanor, gave him a knowing nod. "You see, son, the real world isn't about fancy dinners or easy paths. It's about grit, determination, and knowing how to survive when things aren't going the way you want them to. It's those moments that shape who you are." Barron couldn't help but smile. His father's words, though often blunt and direct, had a certain power behind them that few others could match. Even in the midst of his own struggles, President Trump had always found a way to push forward, to conquer obstacles with sheer willpower. That was something Barron had always admired but never fully understood until now. The colonel walked over, his expression now more relaxed. Mr. President, Barron, he said with a grin, I think it's safe to say that Barron just earned the respect of every soldier here today. Not by his name, but by his actions. That's what we all value most. Barron's heart swelled with a sense of pride. In a place where names didn't matter, where lineage didn't guarantee respect, he had earned something real. It wasn't the respect of the elite or the political world, but the respect of people who had seen the hardest sides of life. That was worth more than anything else. I'm just trying to learn, Barron said humbly, his voice carrying a new confidence that he hadn't expected to feel. I want to understand what it takes. Not just to be part of something bigger, but to really contribute. President Trump looked at his son, his gaze softening. You're on the right track, Barron. Keep pushing yourself. Keep stepping outside of your comfort zone. That's where growth happens. As the conversation continued, Barron's thoughts began to drift. He thought about the many children, young adults, and people his age who were following his journey from afar, people who looked up to the Trump name but perhaps didn't fully grasp the challenges or the sacrifices it took to be part of such a legacy. What if they could see him like this? What if they could understand that, just like everyone else, he was trying to find his place in the world? That thought sparked something inside Barron. Maybe it wasn't enough to simply exist in the shadows of his family's name. Maybe he could do more. Maybe he could be a source of inspiration for others who didn't have the platform, the resources, or the support to face the challenges he had been given the opportunity to confront. A few hours later, after the meal had concluded and the soldiers began to clean up, Barron took a walk with Colonel Harris. The colonel had been a steady presence throughout the day, offering Barron insight and wisdom that went beyond military life. They had spoken about everything from resilience to leadership, and Barron had begun to realize how much he could learn from the people around him. You know, Barron, Colonel Harris said thoughtfully, this day could be a turning point for you. It's not about the meal or the MRE. It's about understanding that life isn't handed to you on a silver platter. The choices you make and the actions you take are what define you. You've already shown you're willing to step up. Barron looked up at the colonel, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I've been given a lot in life, but I'm starting to understand that what I do with it matters more than anything else. The colonel smiled, placing a hand on Barron's shoulder. That's the spirit. Keep that fire inside of you. People will follow you, and not because of your last name. They'll follow because they see you have the heart to lead. As Barron walked back toward the mess hall, he couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity. He wasn't sure exactly what his future held, but for the first time, he felt as though he was moving in the right direction. He wasn't just trying to live up to an expectation. He was trying to create his own path, one step at a time. The next few days passed in a blur of briefings, meetings, and official duties. But Barron found that he couldn't shake the impact of that day. The military meal, the lessons from the colonel, and his father's rare words of encouragement had stayed with him, fueling a newfound sense of purpose. He began to quietly reach out to a few trusted friends, asking them to help him organize something that could inspire others to embrace the same values of resilience and grit that had been taught to him in that mess hall. He didn't want to talk about it just yet, but the idea was beginning to take shape in his mind. He would use his platform not just for himself, but for others who needed the encouragement to face their own challenges head-on. As Barron sat down in his room later that night, staring at his phone, he felt the weight of his decision. He had no idea how it would all unfold, but he was ready to try, ready to show the world that the youngest Trump had a lot more to offer than they ever thought possible. In the days that followed, Barron kept the lesson from the military meal close to his heart. The experience had changed him, and though it had only been a single moment in time, it felt like a pivotal one. He realized that no matter how much people knew about him, no matter how many expectations were placed upon him because of his last name, his actions were what would define him. He had learned in a very profound way that character wasn't inherited, it was earned. Barron's desire to take action soon blossomed into something tangible. Late one evening, he sat in his room and began drafting a speech. It was the first step in a project he had been quietly planning, something that would take his experience from the military meal and turn it into a campaign of his own. He began with a simple message: resilience and courage are universal. He wanted to create a series of motivational speeches, interviews, and digital content designed to inspire young people who were struggling to overcome adversity. Barron had seen firsthand how easy it was for people to get stuck in a cycle of self-doubt, and he wanted to show them that anyone, no matter their circumstances, could build resilience and strength in the face of challenges. This wasn't just for his peers. Barron had been inspired by the soldiers he had met, who had dedicated their lives to protecting others, often under the harshest conditions. He realized that his project could be a way to bridge the gap between privilege and hardship, to make people understand that true courage came from within. With this in mind, Barron enlisted the help of some key figures in his circle, trusted mentors, individuals who had guided him throughout his life. One of these people was his mother, Melania, who had always emphasized the importance of self-discipline, strength, and compassion. Barron shared his idea with her one evening, hoping for her approval. Melania said thoughtfully as she listened to her son's vision, "This project could be very powerful. It's not about telling people what they should do, it's about sharing the lessons that life has taught you and encouraging them to find their own path." Her words were exactly what Barron needed to hear. His mother had a way of putting things into perspective, always reminding him that the most important work wasn't about recognition, but about making a difference in someone else's life. Barron spent the next several weeks organizing the logistics for his initiative. He reached out to some of his father's advisors, including communication experts, and worked with a small team to design the campaign's outreach. They developed a digital platform where Barron would share motivational content, including personal stories, interviews with individuals who had overcome major challenges, and advice from military veterans. Barron's idea was simple: real stories of resilience from real people. He wanted to create a space where anyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, could go to find inspiration. The goal wasn't just to motivate, it was to empower. Once the campaign began to take shape, Barron decided to speak directly to young people in his generation. He recorded a video, looking directly into the camera with a quiet intensity. "Hello, I'm Barron Trump," he began, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I know that many of you may look at me and think that I have everything handed to me, but that's not the case. I've learned the hard way that true strength doesn't come from what you have, but from what you can overcome. Life isn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It's about making the most of the one you've got. And if I can do it, so can you." The video was posted on his new platform, which quickly gained traction. Barron's words resonated with many who had struggled to find their voice or their purpose in life. Messages of support and gratitude flooded in from people across the country, and Barron was amazed at the impact he was having. The first video was just the beginning. Barron followed it up with more content, including interviews with veterans who had faced unimaginable challenges, entrepreneurs who had built businesses from the ground up, and young people who had turned their lives around after facing hardship. Each story shared was meant to show that anyone could rise above their circumstances if they had the courage to push through adversity. As the platform grew, Barron felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that this wasn't just about building a following or gaining attention. It was about making a real difference in the lives of people who needed it most. He began to see the world in a new light, understanding that true leadership wasn't about titles or positions of power. It was about service, empathy, and action. The project took off in ways Barron hadn't imagined. As his content spread, it wasn't just young people who tuned in. His platform reached people from all walks of life: military veterans, business owners, students, and people who simply needed a reminder that they weren't alone. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and soon, Barron was being invited to speak at events and conferences to share his message. One of the most moving moments came when Barron was invited to speak at a military veterans event, where he was introduced to a group of soldiers who had seen the worst of humanity's cruelty in battle. They had lived through the kinds of challenges that Barron could never fully understand, but they were deeply moved by his project and his message of resilience. "I've been through a lot in my life," one veteran said, shaking Barron's hand after the speech. "But hearing you speak today, I feel like maybe there's still something more I can do. You're not just talking about surviving, you're talking about thriving. And that's something we all need to hear." Barron, visibly humbled by the encounter, nodded. "I'm just trying to show people that strength comes in many forms. It's not about how much you can endure, it's about what you do with what you've been given." As the years passed, Barron's initiative continued to grow. His platform became a hub for motivational content, a place where young people and adults alike could go for inspiration and support. He never lost sight of the core message: resilience, courage, and the power of choice. What started as a lesson learned from an MRE in a military mess hall had transformed Barron Trump into someone much more than the son of a president. He had become a beacon of hope for others, proving that anyone, no matter their background, could rise to the challenge and make a lasting impact on the world. And for Barron, that was only the beginning. His journey of self-discovery had just begun, and with it, he was ready to lead not with his name, but with his actions.